I started my junior year of high school as a new student at Pittsford Mendon High School, just outside of Rochester, New York. Everyone had their own group of friends by junior year, so it was really hard not to know anyone. The worst part was lunch, because juniors weren't allowed to leave for lunch, only seniors were. So I had to eat in the cafeteria, which I was dreading, because I knew I wouldn't have anyone to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself to sit at a random table. When it was finally time for lunch, I went into the cafeteria with my tray of food, and tried to find a place to sit, but every table was already taken. I couldn't even sit by myself. But there was one table in the corner of the cafeteria where there were only 2 kids. It seemed like the least scary place to sit, so I went over and asked if I could eat there. They both looked at each other, and one of them said, "Yeah, no problem." I noticed the 2 were identical twins, and they looked like they were partially of Italian heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed all right, and they introduced themselves as Tony and Leonardo. They started up a conversation with me, and they invited me to hang out with them after school, and honestly, I figured, why not? I had to start off somewhere as far as making friends. I got their numbers, and shortly after school I got a text from Leonardo saying he and his brother were going to hang out later. He told me to meet them around 9 o'clock that night at a nearby cemetery that was about a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot nearby, plus the first day of school was on a Friday, so we had off the next day. So I said, yeah, I'm down. When the time came, Leonardo texted me again, asking if I was still coming. I said I'd leave in a few minutes and confirmed we'd meet on the road by the cemetery. He said yes, so I began my walk in the dark to the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my recent move and being the new kid in high school, and also the fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with 2 kids I had just met. But I got to the little road next to the cemetery and asked Leonardo where they were. He began typing immediately and said that they were in the woods, hanging out by a small lake that they wanted to show me. Then he sent his location, so I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way with my tiny phone flashlight as my only source of light. I started calling for Leonardo and Tony because I thought I was close enough based on the location he sent me. I came to a halt when I heard footsteps. There were definitely footsteps approaching me. They were slow and low. They had better not be trying to scare me, I said out loud. They weren't responding, so I decided this was a bad idea. I turned around and began walking back toward the road. Those footsteps I mentioned earlier, they went from quiet and slow to fast, and before I could react, someone was digging their nails into my neck, effectively choking me. Then I felt a plastic bag being pulled over my head. "Grab him! Grab him!" yelled a familiar voice. I was able to free myself from the chokehold and ripped the bag off my head as I sprinted as fast as I could towards the road. I know they followed me all the way to the roadside tree line. I was faster than them, as I was literally running for my life, and I could run for miles, so I did. I raced home to tell my parents. They thought about calling the cops, but I decided it would be better to take pictures of the scratch marks on my neck and then report it to school the next day. That's exactly what we did, and with the help of the text I obtained from Leonardo, I was able to expel the two students. My parents forced me to block both of their phone numbers. My parents wanted me to confirm that these kids didn't know where we lived, and I simply told them that they didn't as far as I knew. So about a week later, I awoke in my room feeling extremely cold. I heard wind blowing into my room and looked out the window to see it was completely open. I wondered if my mother came in to open it, but that would be absurd. That night, it was around 50 degrees outside. I approached the window and looked down a few feet below my bedroom window. My house has a section of the roof that sticks out, creating a sort of ledge beneath my window that my father always told me to jump onto in case of a fire. I closed my window and went over to my parents' room. My mom groggily asked, "What?" when I gently knocked and opened the door. I had to inquire as to whether she had opened my window. She sat up and asked why. I told her in a more concerned tone that someone had opened my window all the way. She began shaking my father to wake him up and go with me to my room, but when he awoke, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. I walked back down the hall to my room, leaving my parents' door open, and I noticed something that surprised me. My door, it appeared to be half closed now, rather than completely open when I left. I pushed the door open just enough to peek through the crack and see if there was anyone behind the door. Even though I had considered the possibility, I never actually expected to see anyone hiding behind my door. I screamed like a little girl for my father. I screamed so loudly that I'm sure it could be heard 3 doors down, and my door slammed shut just as my father rushed out of his room and over to me. I screamed, "There are people in my room," and he barged in and turned on the light. We saw a person's leg jump out my window at that moment. My father dashed to the window, then downstairs and out the front door to try to catch them. But he returned a few minutes later, out of breath, saying he hadn't seen anyone. I was terrified and assumed it had to be those twins who I had expelled. My father called the cops, and I had to explain everything to them when they arrived, all the way back to the incident in the woods. My father supported my story, but they said there was nothing they could do without proof of who entered. They simply told us to lock the doors and think about installing cameras outside. As certain as I am that it was one or both of those twins in my room, after a solid couple months of sleeping in fear, nothing of the sort ever happened again. Looking back, I'm not sure why I was so eager to meet these kids in the woods at night. I should have recognized them as troublemakers in the cafeteria that day and avoided them. One night, back when I was a freshman in high school, my friends and I devised a brilliant plan. We'd sneak into the high school basement through one of the windows. It was broken and had never been repaired. The weird thing about this window is that you have to pass through a short metal gate that surrounds the outside staircase, leading to the basement. It doesn't effectively stop anyone, but it adds that extra barrier that makes you feel like you're doing something extra wicked when you cross it. We hopped the gate after making sure there were no security cameras nearby. Crawling in through the window was difficult because we had to lift ourselves up and then crawl through an insanely small opening. But once in, we were in. we sort of separated from one another to explore different areas. One thing was certain. The school's basement was a shambles and not very interesting. And there wasn't much light. One small white light was turned on in the far corner, and the exit sign light produced more light than you might think. I was looking around when I noticed one of my friends standing in front of me. He said, "Let's go upstairs," so I followed him upstairs, and he opened the door to the school's main hallway. Everything was in the dark. I had assumed that there would be some lights left on in the school at night, but there were none, and all that really stood out as far as the eye could see were the various exit signs glowing red. I followed my friend down the hall, and remembered telling him, "Dude, this is really creepy." And I wondered silently if anyone else could be in the building besides my friends and me. I really had no idea. I went into the bathroom with my friend, and he went into one of the stalls. "Hurry up," I said. I waited a few moments before my phone began to ring. When I answered the phone, it was one of my friends, Dave. He asked where the hell I had gone. I told him that I had gone upstairs with Andy. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Andy is with me." And then Andy said hello, apparently on speakerphone. I stopped trying to think straight after I stuttered the word, "What?" Then there was a burst of laughter from the stall. None of my friends laughed like that. When I looked up at the stall, there was someone standing on the toilet looking over it at me. As I ran out of the bathroom, I screamed "Holy crap" into the phone. I heard the stall door slam shut and felt an icy hand grabbing my lower leg just as I was leaving. I tried running back to the basement in the dark, but it wasn't easy to find. Fortunately, I found it and began yelling for my friends as I ran down the stairs. When they answered, I yelled, "Go, go!" and we all jumped off some kind of bucket onto the window ledge and crawled back outside. I was the first one out, but I was still worried that someone from the bathroom was following me. When we were all outside, I told them, out of breath, and with a mix of crying and laughing, that I felt safe with all of them next to me. I guess we were too loud or something, because as we all started looking around at the entire school building and all the classroom windows, we noticed someone with their hands pressed up against one of the downstairs windows. We could only see half of their face, and I said, "That's got to be him," as Rich motioned for us to leave immediately. We ran until we were off the school grounds, and that was the end of it. We considered a number of explanations, but none of them made sense. After all, we were scared straight, and obviously never did anything like that again.